Is TCU finding value where others aren't? A lot of you have talked to me the last few weeks, listeners, viewers, about who are some of these kids that TCU has landed. Why are they going after some more under-the-radar players? We have our scout, Brian Smith, with us today, and he'll talk about that and more next on Locked On Horned Frogs.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right. Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. We're talking recruiting today. And when we talk recruiting, we are sponsored by LinkedIn. You see the overlay there, LinkedIn Jobs. If you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn is a college recruiting sponsor across the Locked On Podcast Network, and LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to, and they do it faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions do apply. And happy to have Brian Smith with us. He's at FB_Scout_Florida on Twitter. He is our recruiting expert, scouting expert here at the Locked On Network. And Brian, when I first had you on a few months ago, we were talking about guys like Bryant Wesco, Jordan Johnson-Rubel. TCU was really swinging for the fences coming off that, that run last season, the national championship game. They've sort of regrouped here after missing on some of those players. And I think expectations have been recalibrated a little bit. The fan base is kind of antsy. And I want to talk about the kids first because I don't want to be unfair to the kids, the young men that are committed. But they have gone somewhat of a different direction. One of those players that I really like is a small school offensive lineman out of Texas, out of Stephenville. His name is Crease Brister. And Brian, he's playing tackle right now. I think he'll probably slide inside. At least that's what he's told people at the college level he kind of expects to do. But pretty good size at 6'4", 295. What do you see when you took a look at his game and what he can do?
He is what I would call a top-heavy player. Like I would bet money that his dad has a humongous chest because that's just kind of how he's built too. Needs to add more strength in the lower body, but man, he is powerful. And he just kind of plays, like you said, as somebody that would fit inside and be a grinder, be a guy that's going to overwhelm players with his raw strength. And he gets after it at the second level too. Like he'll hustle and go to the second block if he demolishes somebody. He's a kid that TCU fans will like. I don't think that's even a question. So I think he's just got to learn how to play football against guys his own size. Stephenville is like an hour and a half from Dallas or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's out there in the middle of nowhere. I'm sure there aren't many kids where he's playing that can match his size. So that'll be the interesting thing for him.
What are coaches looking for when we talk about the difference between a tackle and a guard? I mean, is it just the size and athleticism? What are some of the factors that sort of make a difference in playing on the inside or outside of the offensive line?
First thing I would think is just sheer athleticism to kick step against a guy that's probably going to be 50 to 80 pounds lighter than you. Well, there are a lot of 240 to 250 pound guys that play that 7 technique, like outside the tackle. You know what they're going to do, but they're also a heck of a lot faster than you. So how athletic are you? Are you going to have the length to get at least a hand on them to push them by? Those are things you need. Inside guys, it's more about beat you up and power, but there's also the screen game now. It's changed some, the evolution with the screen game in college football. You see it constantly. It's almost boring in a sense until somebody pops a 75-yarder when they put no effort into it. That's why they keep doing it. It's kind of hard to screw him up sometimes. So I think he can play tackle in the right situation, but it would have to be more of a run dominant scheme, and that fits his personality. So I think he's better inside long-term, but old school football, he could have played right tackle in the old Southwest Conference or something, and he'd have been fine.
Another lineman they grabbed out of Louisiana, Monroe, Louisiana, Mitch Hodnett, another 3-star player, had offers from like K-State, Oklahoma State. I'll be interested to see if LSU kind of gets in the mix because he's sort of right there in their backyard. But heavy O-line here, Brian, in these last couple of weeks for TCU, and another guy that hopefully they can work in here later. But what did you see from Mitch when you got to take a look at sort of what makes him special and pop as a player?
Well, first off, he's what I was just talking about. I think athletically he could move his feet well enough he could play tackle.
Okay.
He's not as big as some other kids. Like Kreese is a really big guy. This kid's listed at 260 from his junior year. You know how accurate that is all the way August of his senior year, getting ready to go into, I'm not sure, but he has a chance to be the developmental offensive tackle that TCU probably has made a living on for better part of 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
Athletically, though, when you have kids like that, he can play guard, he can play tackle, he can move them around and fit things in that's best for the team. I also think he's got a good enough footwork to play on the outside against those guys I was talking about that weigh 240, 250. So
right.
that it's hilarious. Like Northern Louisiana is infamous for having these small school kids nobody knows about, and somebody see them like, who is that? And they get an offer from an Alabama or a Florida or whatever, and it doesn't match the other offers.
Yeah.
TCU has done their due diligence because I watch this kid. I'm like, yeah, he can play.
Mm-hmm.
He's the best of the linemen that I saw on film.
And maybe two other guys that were really way out of left field, at least from like a attention standpoint or a publicity standpoint. So they go and get Wesley Harvey, who's from Muskogee, Oklahoma, which I've never heard of that town in Oklahoma, Brian. But this dude's big. He's 6'7". Now they got him listed at like 250, so a big, tall, slender guy. But took a chance on him. Not a hugely impressive offer list, but another one of these kind of developmental projects. And I guess probably just saw the frame here and are looking to maybe take a chance on a guy that just has massive size coming from a smaller school.
I have heard of Muskogee before. They've had a few players actually.
Okay.
But he's a kid that has the length you're looking for. He is long. And I don't know if he can play left tackle. That's to be determined because he's so raw in terms of his technique. He needs a lot of polish, a lot of polish. He's a redshirt kid. But you can't teach the length. You can't teach the height. And he could end up being at least a right tackle. And he's strong enough already, even though he needs to add weight. He could probably play some guard too. So I don't have a problem with that. I mean, these are the kinds of kids that Oklahoma and Texas have taken for years too. O-line's different, man. They're not made, they are built. Mm-hmm. And it's just about the grind and the kids trying to figure it out. I mean, there's a reason that 15 is kind of like the minimum you want on your college roster out of 85 because so many are busts. It's about what they do once they get on campus. This is a kid that could end up in the NFL or never play a down for the Frogs.
Right.
It's really hard to project.
Yeah. Can you expand more on how it's just it's to a certain extent, it's a numbers game with O-line play. Like you have to get them in and then see what they can do once they get on campus.
It's about above the shoulders. It's the mentality of all the things that O-linemen probably don't like doing. It's their diet. It's all the little things they do with stretching. They do a lot of these schools do yoga, make them do yoga and stuff now. Like big guys hate that. But how much do you want to be great? You hear that phrase a lot. O-line, it's a big part of it. And then the technique, O-line technique is forever. I've got a few buddies that have played professionally, et cetera, that I get to watch them work with kids that are really good. Some went to Miami and Alabama and different places. And it is so precise. There's no quick way to do it. So it tests your mental fortitude in how much do I want it, but every single day. There is no day off. And you have to be studying something all the time. Offensive line is a grind. Even the great players like Orlando Pace is probably the best offensive lineman I've seen in my life. You know, he was just ridiculous. Walked in and started at Ohio State, first pick in the NFL draft, the whole nine. He's the 1 in a billion guy. Like he just figured it out really quick. And he was also stronger, bigger, and more athletic than everybody. Okay, throw him aside. There aren't many other guys that are really in that realm, and they've got to work at it. And there's some kids that end up being NFL starters that aren't even as athletic as the kid we're talking about from Muskogee.
Yeah.
And it's all technique, man. And it takes forever. So it's the mental fortitude to get to that point and understanding how to work with 4 other guys. It's really hard.
When we come back, there's another player, an athlete out of Oklahoma City that I want to ask Brian about, LaDainian Fields. And then I also want to ask you, Brian, about a new trend with the transfer portal. And I know you cover the transfer portal heavily. And so we'll get into that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. I do want to briefly mention Birddogs as well, birddogs.com/lockedoncollege. Birddogs, their shorts, their pants that make you fit good. They're designed to fit slimmer and give you a sculpted look. They do the same thing that Lululemon does, which is one of the most well-known brands in the country, but they fit way better than regular shorts. They've been kind enough to send us some products. I love them. If you go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, you can get a free white tech hat with your order, which is a hat that I'm wearing right now. You can get this hat for free if you go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege and order and do that today. And that's birddogs.com. Birddogs, another sponsor here of the Locked On Network. Doing our LinkedIn jobs recruiting segment here. And so, Brian, before we get to LaDainian Fields, sort of a random question for you, but Chance Nolan, who was a transfer quarterback for TCU, he left the program after a few days. Apparently it just didn't work out, didn't feel like he was going to see the field for the Frogs and decided to move on. And they haven't announced who it is, but now they're going after another grad transfer QB. And I was thinking about this the other day. It's almost like experienced quarterbacks at the college level, and not even guys that have played, but it's kind of like backup QB in the NFL. Like there's a place now for like older guys who've kind of been around to just slide in on a roster somewhere and be a, break glass in case of emergency type player. I don't know if that's always been a trend, but it's just fascinating to me that they're probably going to go grab somebody that hasn't played it down just because, hey, we need another guy to run scout team. We need another player to, be available if something goes bad. There's just all these different roles now with the portal and the availability to move freely that have kind of opened up in the college football world.
I've had this conversation with numerous people, both as recruiting analysts, college coaches, quarterback coaches, etc. It takes, like O-line I was just discussing, it takes a long time. Quarterback is ridiculous how long it takes, and they also want maturity. They're going to take the kid at quarterback that's 20 years old over the 18-year-old every time.
Right.
That is by far the number one reason for what you just said. And it's going to accelerate. And it's one of the reasons if you go look at Rivals or 247, whatever site you want, and just type in quarterback commitments, there are like 10, 15 kids in the 25 class that have already committed. They're buying up their spots to make sure somebody else doesn't get it because of this trend.
Yeah.
Because even some really good quarterbacks aren't getting that many offers because like every other year, they're just like, we're just going to take a portal kid.
Yeah.
And it's tough because they don't have a lot of coaches don't feel like they have the time, and they're right that these fans like TCU, they're not very patient. They want to win yesterday, not now, yesterday. Yeah. And it just takes too long to develop. So they want a guy that's got some experience, at least being around a program, knowing what it's like to go through the strength program, all the little things. They'll take their chances with that. And it's unfortunate, but I understand.
Yeah, it almost feels like it might be the hardest part of coaching right now is just keeping multiple competent QBs on the roster because they're always
any better. You couldn't have.
They're always wanting to move, right? Like everybody just wants to play immediately. And I mean, I'm not even faulting the kids for that because it's like this is just the world we live in. And people take new jobs or new opportunities all the time, but it's just a very different world than 10 years ago where, I'll sit for 2 seasons and sort of be trained up behind coach and veteran quarterback X, right?
Well, look, Lane Kiffin is obviously a quarterback guy. Well, he took the kid from Oklahoma State that you're well familiar with, and then he left. He didn't win. As soon as he wasn't the guy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Spencer Sanders has got a ton of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it just doesn't work out for whatever reason, and they leave. I mean, there are teams that would die to have that kid. If he'd have made a chance to go to a different Power 5 school in the spring, he'd be going there. But I think he ended up somewhere smaller or whatever for this way. I can't remember, but it's just that's how it works, man. Sometimes you're not the guy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy how competitive it is. Like people talk about the portal. People talk about kids going into the portal because they're afraid of competition, but it's insane how competitive it is once you're in the portal to find a spot where you can still, be effective or just get a roster spot. It's sort of insane how much transition there is now. Moving on to the 2024 class again. So LaDainian Fields, TCU landed him as well. Athlete from Oklahoma. I think it sounds like he might play defensive back for the Frogs, but 6'1", 170. And it seems like, Brian, this is another guy with just great athleticism that they found who has some of the skills that you would see in a athlete at the next level.
The length and the speed were there. When I was watching this film, I was just thinking to myself, this is the kind of kid that a lot of DB coaches get mad because they could be really good at corner or safety. He could probably play either, but they always want to play offense. There's 2 or 3 kids in the state of Florida this year that I think would be better at defense that are elite recruits still on offense, but They want to catch the ball. This kid, I don't know, but I mean, he could play receiver for me. I mean, it wouldn't matter because I just think Fields is good.
Yeah.
He makes guys look pretty bad, and he's just very natural in and out of his breaks. But that's also why they would look at him as a corner first. Corner is the one spot where it's about talent above all else. It's the opposite of O-line and quarterback. If you can't turn and run and just get on it, it's not going to work out, especially like in the Big 12. This just in, there are quite a few good receivers in that league every year. So he could play either side. I wouldn't be surprised if he's a guy that ended up returning kicks, regardless if he's a corner or safety or receiver. He's just natural with the ball in his hands. But on the other side of that, TCU isn't getting the corners that go to A&M and LSU very often. So if you can find a 6'1" kid that could play corner, I understand.
Yeah.
Because that you got to have those two. And the way the world works today in college football, you need 3 corners in every recruiting class, which is almost – you're taking a shot on somebody. And like even LSU has to take a flyer on kids sometimes. Like LSU is DBU to me. So that's saying something. That there are just not enough kids that want to play it. It's really hard.
And it definitely seems like Joe Gillespie wants longer, rangier corners. Is that just the way of the world now, Brian, in football in general? Or do you feel like that's specific to like the 3-3-5 kind of setup that he likes to run?
No, it's because the defense, I can break it down pretty quick. Think about every team does this, TCU too. The triangle you see out there, those bunch formations, the days of just putting your number one corner out on a guy and letting it ride are over. Because you can put your best receiver in some form of a stack and they go in different. You just get picked off. The defense it's over. There's no way to fix that. I've talked to coaches about it. So when you're trailing, you need length. At least you can reach out and make a play.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, it's that generic because of the bunch formations, and it's impossible. Like Tennessee, what they did to Alabama last year, I mean, I think they just scored again. Like Saban's match defense, I love schematics and all that. It is uber complex. If you run a basic offensive set, he'll have an answer and their players adjust on the fly. They teach them and all that, and they got length too. You're in trouble. So they spread them out so far. It was like and they would switch which way they went and everything. It took away all those advantages, even with the length.
Yep.
Could you imagine if Alabama didn't have big DB? I mean, they got smoked anyway. Yeah. So it's hard, man. If you play teams that got real receivers, length is just absolutely a requirement. Teams running around with 5'10" corners are the ones that are in the 100s in pass defense at the end of the year. It's just true. You're going to get mossed in the end zone in particular on those red zone fades. They can almost tell you they're coming. You got to have length.
When we come back, we'll wrap up with something that affects Brian's world, realignment, right? It affects recruiting too. And we'll discuss that next here on Locked On Horned Frogs. FanDuel, if you want to make some money this football season is starting, folks, and they have a really cool promotion right now. If you bet on the Super Bowl winner, so you bet on the Chiefs, for instance, to repeat again and win a Super Bowl, you get bonus bets every time they win in a regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you get bonus bets for every victory. That means if you pick the Chiefs for every Chiefs win, you get bonus bets that you could use on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. One more time, FanDuel.com/lockedon, another sponsor here on the Locked On Network. Doing our LinkedIn jobs recruiting show today here with Brian Smith. And so, Brian, the Big 12, they added Colorado. They have added Utah and the 2 Arizona schools. My first thought when Colorado joined, I know Deion was a huge part of that. And my first thought, Brian, was like, man, I bet Deion wants to get back in the state of Texas so bad. Not that he can't recruit the state of Texas without that Big 12 affiliation, but that just seemed to make sense. But the 4 corner schools sort of in the mountain time zone joining the Big 12, how do you feel like that affects recruiting as Texas and Oklahoma exit and then they move in?
Well, it depends on each school. Like for Colorado and Deion, he's lived in the Dallas area forever. So they had an in to begin with. He's a Frisco guy, which is like 20 minutes from Dallas. But I don't think it's going to hurt them. But because they're going to come in and get some Texas kids. But I also think the Texas schools get a little more advantage because they'll start recruiting the state of California a little better too. If you go out to Phoenix to play the Sun Devils, there's a pretty good chance on Thursday or Friday, one or two of your coaches went to San Diego or LA to scout kids. And that's part of it, man. You're a really broad conference, not as much as the Big Ten is going to be, by the way. That's insane. But I still haven't quite wrapped my head around that yet. But you're going to have more opportunities. So you're going to have a team in Utah that has won the league like the last 2 years or whatever in the Pac-12. You're going to get some more stability from that. I think they have a tremendous coaching staff, by the way. You're going to have Arizona and Arizona State who are kind of up and down. You're going to have Deion. There's going to be some sparks around the league, and then you get that California base. If TCU can add just 2 kids a year from like Arizona, San Diego, or whatever, that helps your roster.
Right.
It changes your roster. I mean, California has always been one of the big 3, Texas, California, and Florida. Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio. There's a few others that are kind of in that mix too. But, man, you add that element right there next to it because all those schools from the 4 corners recruit California heavily. And you're going to be kind of adding that into the mix because you're going out to play them. You're going to recruit Cali too. It's very good for the league.
You know, we've been talking about some of the guys that TCU's picked up in the last few weeks. There's so much coverage of recruiting now, Brian, and I'm always amazed when I talk to people like you because, you know, it's one thing to be like an NFL draft guy. I know there's a ton of college players that you have to know, and like you'll get in round 7 and they'll start quizzing Daniel Jeremiah and he knows whatever player from whatever school. But there are a billion high school players across the country, and you guys are expected to know like who's who and how they can project. Is it possible to still find some of these like hidden gems with all the scouting services and camps we have? I mean, I know it is, but it just seems like, you know, it's crazy to me that there's still guys that kind of slip through the cracks to a certain extent from an industry standpoint and a rating standpoint, because there's just so much information out there now about who these players are, and there's the ability to really showcase themselves.
It depends on the high school. The head coaches have a lot to do that. Unfortunately, some head coaches do a lousy job in promoting their kids, so I don't get a text or they don't put out a tweet. It only takes like 1 tweet. If your kid makes 3 guys miss and scores a touchdown, somebody's going to take notice and put him on their sheet. Right. It's not that hard, but it's also location. Like if you go out to West Texas, there's probably some kid that's going to end up at, you know, playing for the Roadrunners or whatever instead of the Longhorns or the Frogs because he's at some small school outside of El Paso. I mean, I don't know anybody in El Paso. I couldn't name a single school in El Paso, and it's 1 million+ people. Right. But they always have a few kids that are good. Location's important. And then finally, do they go around to the camps and combines? The ones that do, there's always a kid that shows up at one of these. You're like, who is that? Like they walk up and they're just way different than everybody else that's standing. I'm like, okay, I need to find out. Got to get a photo of this kid, get his information. Yeah, it's all about the opportunity to be seen. So it's amazing, but we live in a very large country. So every now and then, there's a gym.
He's Brian Smith. You can find him at FBScout_Florida. Brian, if people follow you on Twitter, on YouTube, what can they expect from the content that you're churning out there?
Basically anything about recruiting right now. And as we mentioned, the conference realignment, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to put it into words, but like I'm getting ready to do a YouTube thing about how it's going to change recruiting. Like Florida State and Clemson, I know they're that grant of rights thing. It's pretty obvious they would like to go to the Big Ten. I don't know if they can, but can you imagine what that would help the Big Ten schools to be able to recruit further down south? You know, they love it. There's all kinds of nuances to it. That's the kind of stuff I'm working on because it is just so broad. By the way, Stanford and Cal to the ACC. You're never going to convince me that's a good idea. You're just not. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
that's terrible.
The Atlantic Coast Conference that now features 2 West Coast institutions. It makes no sense, but hey, that's college football now. It's just it doesn't make geographical sense anymore. Brian, thanks so much.
Thank you much, buddy. Have a good day.
Thank you. This is Locked On Horned Frogs. It's your team every day.